So as it relates to Pay.Party, when you saw participants and candidates, what were your initial reactions to that?
Um,
Was it confusing? Was it
well, so I basically did the same exact thing last week. So
okay.
I have like a
So
little bit of an
okay, so
understanding, but like
you've used Pay.Party before.
just once.
Okay, cool,
Um,
cool, cool.
and that was a week ago or whatever. And um, like, yeah, I just like participants versus candidates doesn't necessarily like even right now thinking about it, like it's not obvious like who is getting paid and who is voting. Um, but like I can deduce it if I think about it.
Would it make
Uh,
more sense to like rename those like voters and
I think voters,
payees? Yeah.
yeah, like payees and voters, or
Yeah.
cool.
Simplify the language you're saying.
Yeah, just participants and candidates is not. It's not instantly obvious to me who's doing what. And I don't. I also don't think there was like a an explainer or anything. You know, like a hovered. Oh, this person does this.
Like a pop-up menu or a sub menu for like payouts that you suggested earlier.
Yeah, so like I just pulled it up again, and for instance, it says name, description, then participants, and then it just says like an example, alice.eth or an address. So yeah, so
A
like
sub menu that explains each UI interface would be super
so
beneficial.
yeah, like two options: participants rename as payees, candidates rename as voters, or keep those names and or um, like where that says example alice.eth, maybe it could also say like these are the people who are getting paid, these are the people who are voting. But I think the easiest is just to rename them payees and voters.
I
Got it. Thanks.
agree.
I do like the idea of being super explicit of like who should get paid, who should vote on who gets paid. Like,
Yeah, it can be confusing when you first approach it.
I ran a tiny little experiment of my own while we were running the Pay.Party, which is I did not vote before the payout and then tried to vote after the payout. And I was unable to vote, which is a good thing, but there was no messaging around like why I couldn't vote or why my votes weren't going through. And there was also like there wasn't a clear indication that a payout had already happened. And since I imagine that some of these pay parties may be happening async, it might be a good idea. Like we can prioritize whether or not we want to include something like that, depending on how much of an edge case we think that is. But wanted to throw that out there.
Do you think it would be a good idea to have a time clock indicating how much time you had to allocate your votes?
So
I think that. Go ahead, Hans.
Yeah. Having like time duration sort of parties would be, I think, more difficult than what's necessary. I do know that there might be some like vestigial stuff left over from a while ago where you couldn't vote if it's already been distributed. So I'll have to just review to see why that is. There might just be like a that shouldn't be the case. Like you should be able to vote anytime, whether it's distributed or not. The only thing that should prevent you from voting is if you've already have voted.
Right? I actually disagree. If things are already distributed, then my vote is meaningless.
However, you can distribute as many times as you want. So if for example, somebody liked a distribution and they wanted to pay out when, say, 8 out of 10 voters have already voted, then that seems fine. And I mean, like, you know, this is just my perspective, but like that seems fine. And if like a ninth person voted, for example, say later on after it's already been distributed, and like, you know, that vote might be useless, but if somebody else, if it's distributed again, then like, then is there a problem with voting after one distribution has already happened? Like, should it not just be like, I don't know. I mean,
I think it depends on whether our users conceive of a pay party as a sort of ongoing experience, or if they conceive of a pay party as an experience like a tip party. And so is the idea that like someone opens a pay party and it's just it's almost more like a token stream feel of like everybody kind of votes and revotes, and I as the distributor like consistently am distributing through that channel. My suspicion is that based on the description that we had of the user who's trying to run a pay party, that it is a sort of single event experience. And so I would imagine that it would be sort of like, once we feel like most people have voted or everybody has voted, then I distribute, and I wouldn't necessarily come back to distribute in that pay party again. Big assumption on my part, but just based on what we've talked about around how a user is expected to use, or like when a user is expected to use a tool like this.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So I think like you can have both what Laura is saying and what Hans is saying at the same time if you include an ability to like import voting distribution or export the voting distribution and then create your own pay party based off of whatever voting distribution that you exported. So that like you can have that single use pay party, but then also still be able to use that voting distribution in another pay party.
And another, good.
I would actually pause us there, because let's focus just on what we know so far about where like how we imagine a user, or like when we imagine a user would use Pay.Party to solve a problem that they have, which is I've got a group of people and I want to pay out some extra to them based on what this group of people thinks these other people deserve. And so for the moment, I would say once a vote is once a payout happens, you should not be allowed, like other users should not be allowed to vote anymore in that party, and I should see what the distribution is and therefore know that I missed my opportunity to vote.
Okay. Yeah, I see. I suppose like, yeah, having like proper user feedback would be the best way to have that implemented, because right now, like it just doesn't let you vote, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly. At the moment, it just looks like I'm clicking the button and nothing is happening, and so as a user, it looked to me like the product was glitching or something was wrong.
Gotcha.
Another observation to make in that too is that we're probably not doing a great job of communicating exactly how distribution works, right, to the user. And when I say communicating, I don't mean like, oh, we need to change these fundamental things about how the app works. I mean, like, we just need to be thinking all the way through. Is this something that Matt writes about, like, on the comms level at the very beginning? Or is this something that we try little UI things? Or but the overall theme is we're not communicating well to the user.
So better user feedback would be some low-hanging fruit.
I agree. I think it's geared towards single use based on its initial explanation to a novice user. But if your focus is target 10 DAOs, I think somebody operating a multi-sig has that. But to touch on Laura's point, if it's going to be used in multiple stages, like if you're in Meme Palooza and you're doing 3 different competitions for memes, you might want to vote 3 different times and distribute 3 different times. So it would be a specific use case for that tool. However, if that was the case, you would want an indication that your votes were reset and that you could re-vote each iteration for that specific case.
Yep.
In that use case, I'd actually expect a user to create 3 different pay parties.
Same. In the current situation that we're in.
In the current situation, but you're right, Brian. It's possible that like we might want something like that, but for now, let's go with the simplest assumption, which is that Pay.Party is a one-time use experience. And once a distribution occurs, voting is closed, regardless of whether or not you've gotten your votes in.
I concur, and also I might suggest a single use for each mainnet, like for only Ethereum, only DAI network, or Matic, whichever. That way, if you join on and you're set to Matic, you don't have to juggle networks, or if you have to reset your MetaMask like Michael did, you don't know to refresh that. That might be something that needs to be explained, even for like a wizard.
Yeah, user feedback is definitely an important thing.
I think what you're bringing up, Brian, is some
that feedback at every possible stage is vital to curation of data and implementing.
Brian, I think what you're bringing up is really good assumptions that we should be keeping in mind when doing user tests, because that may be that in our user test, we find that a lot of our users back up all these assumptions that you have, and they're very valid. So like the next step after the assumption that you have is for us to go off and validate it as a problem.
I would say as testing it from the perspective of like a distributor user, also maybe like some feedback to me is like, oh, only 5 people have voted. Like once you distribute, you can't, it's over. So
I'd like to see a request for feedback, that same confetti that drops down indicating that the action has been completed on the initial try.
Hans could do like a modal on the distribute button that pops up and says, yeah, we'd like to confirm you'd like to distribute, only 5 people. This is blank out of blank voters have voted, and continue or cancel.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
And
like this
when
percent
we
of
nail
people.
it,
Cool.
The option to share that via social media stream, share this, or the preferred top social handles, whatever the kids are into these days.
To your point, Brian, let's ask Michael right now. Michael, what would you have liked to do after this transaction? Is there anything that you would like to have done about it?
No, like not when I was doing it. But yeah, and I'm generally like definitely all about simplicity. But also, I don't know, maybe it would be cool to share it, but counterpoint, maybe some people don't want to share it, like have that information shared about them. So I'm unclear on that.
Hey, so I have a quick question for Laura. Oh, sorry.
I've got bad latency here, so please don't let me interrupt. If I'll think it's clear to talk, and I'll be jumping in mid-sentence. I was just going to suggest that Samir once said that a comment section like we were using on the left here to to discuss during the party, or say, hey, thanks for sending me that tip, would be super awesome, because I'd love to thank anyone that sends me a tip immediately.